live in interesting times. Today's stories. In DR Congo, police dispersed further anti-UN demos in Beni. The WHO relocates staff from DRC's Beni amid unrest. The United Nations warns slash emissions now or face climate disaster. Pompeo says Turkey test of Russian defense system is, quote, concerning. Airspace alert prompts Capitol evacuation in Washington, D.C. The Pentagon chief says ousted Navy secretary made a secret deal with President Donald Trump. Plus, Hawaii residents push back on government-approved improvement projects. This is Eagle News coming to you from Virginia Beach, bringing you stories from around the globe. I am Sarah Nachman. Further protests shake the eastern Congolese town of Beni as the local population vent their anger over the perceived failure of UN peacekeepers to stop deadly militia attacks. People are further angered by a measure introducing a curfew from 1800 local time throughout the Beni region. The governor of North Kivu province says this is to facilitate the work of UN peacekeepers against armed groups, but many local residents do not trust this explanation.
Na ile operation 18 na ba policier na ba soldat tutapikana na yetu tutamutafuta, hatuna lazima operation balileta kaske cha kuingiza ba Rwanda, banaleta operation 18 cha kuingiza ba Rwanda, tunachoka.
Sasa tuko na seta ya masakre leo, njo batakumbuka kusaidia population. Sa population na jiprendre a charge, tunakatala mipangilio yabo yote, population na bila kuishi sie wenyewe tunalala nje na tunachunga wale waadui bashajisambaza huku, tuko na babania moya moya, njo hatutaki tena watutoshe mwele position juu baweze kubapita.
The military said at least 4 protesters were killed in eastern DR Congo on Monday after angry clashes erupted over the perceived failure of UN peacekeepers to stop deadly militia attacks. Crowds defied warning shots fired by Congolese forces and stormed a UN camp which had apparently been evacuated after rioting broke out in the eastern town of Beni. The violence was prompted by the killing overnight of 8 people in Beni, the latest attack blamed on the Allied Democratic Forces or the ADF militia, which has plagued the area for years despite a large UN peacekeeping presence. Dozens of protesters broke into the UN camp and set fire to parts of it after a crowd of several hundred had also set fire to the Beni town hall, partly damaging it. Earlier, the presidential office had announced the DR Congo and UN peacekeepers will launch joint operations to beef up security in an eastern town where massacres by the shadowy group have incensed the population. North Kivu provincial authorities decreed an indefinite dusk-to-dawn curfew in Beni and surrounding area after the rioting. Army spokesman Colonel Mark Hasukai confirmed that the town had been attacked by armed men overnight, saying, quote, the enemy entered the Boikeni quarter and killed 8 civilians. The killing had been blamed on the ADF militia, a group that has its historical roots among Ugandan Islamists, opposed to Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni. The presidency had said after an emergency meeting with the UN force known as MONUSCO, the planned joint operations aimed at, quote, ensuring peace and security for the civilian population. It said in a statement that armed forces of the Democratic Republic of Congo will also set up an advanced headquarters in Beni. There were no details as to when the operation would begin. The UN mission issued its own statement saying it would, quote, strengthen cooperation with its partners and work closely with the authorities to jointly find solutions for the people of Beni. The army launched an offensive in the Beni area on October 30, vowing to, quote, definitively wipe out armed groups in the lawless east. But in response, the ADF has carried out a string of massacres, apparently to discourage people from collaborating with the military. According to a not-for-profit organization, the Congo Research Group, or the CRG, 77 civilians have been killed in the Beni region since November 5. The World Health Organization said Tuesday it had moved 49 staff out of Beni, eastern DR Congo, overnight amid growing insecurity, but warned of the impact on the fight against Ebola.
The security situation in Beni has definitely worsened overnight or throughout the last days. What we see is community violence against the security situation. That's very important for us because it's not a violence directed against the Ebola response, and it's not a violence directed against WHO. From our 120 staff in Beni, overnight 49 had to be evacuated over through the airport with escort and then flown out direction Goma. This operation might be still ongoing or is finished, but that's what it was so far. Message is that while 49 were relocated, 71 remain on the spot to this point to assure as good as possible the best or at least the minimum support to the Ebola response.
The UN Health Agency said it had flown more than a third of its 120 staff in Beni to Goma, further south on the country's eastern border, as insecurity in the area surged. But it said 71 essential staff remain in the town to try to push on with work to rein in the Ebola outbreak that has left some 2,200 dead. WHO spokesman Christian Lindmeier told journalists in Geneva, quote, "The violence needs to stop. This is very bad for the Ebola response." Insecurity has complicated efforts to rein in Ebola since the latest outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo began in August 2008. According to the military on Monday, at least 4 protesters were killed after clashes broke out and protesters stormed a UN camp over the perceived failure of UN peacekeepers to stop deadly attacks from militia groups. Meanwhile, the UN said Tuesday in its annual assessment on greenhouse gases, the world will miss its chance to avert climate disaster without an immediate and all but impossible fall in fossil fuel emissions. The United Nations Environment Program said that global emissions need to fall by 7.6% each year until 2030 to limit global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
The science is clear. The world is facing climate emergency. This is an existential crisis and represents the greatest challenge that are facing by this and future generations. A global challenge of this magnitude cannot be solved by governments alone. It requires involvement and engagement of all segments of societies, business, investors, cities, states, regions, and general population.
If we are looking at the 2-degree target of just around 2 degrees, we have a gap of 12 to 15 gigatons. And if we're looking at the 1.5 degree, which is really the desirable one, we have a gap of around 30 gigatons. And 30 gigatons is more than half of what we emit now. And that's why we need to come down by 55% in 10 years. If that's something you can do if you're waiting, if you're not starting right away, there's simply no way to bend that curve. So if you check with the Met Office in your own country and look at how many small extremes you have, I did it once and I think we break a record almost every second month. It could be the driest, the sunniest, the coldest, the windiest, whatever. It's just indicated that the amplitude goes up with the temperature. So we have all these small disasters, and as we just heard from Mr. Talas, is that in more vulnerable climates, and especially in the tropical areas, this is really disasters without being called a disaster. I mean,
on Paris, we have 10 states that have declared we are still in. We have nearly 300 cities that have declared they're still in. You have faith groups and tribes and cultural institutions and businesses. So this is a reality. We have to accept that there are political views in the United States on this. However, the science does speak, and therefore
The harsh reality is that emissions have risen on average 1.5% annually over the last decade, hitting a record 55.3 billion tons of CO2 or equivalent greenhouse gases in 2018, 3 years after 195 countries signed the Paris Treaty on Climate Change. The World Meteorological Organization said Monday that atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations hit an all-time record in 2018. The Paris deal committed nations to limit temperature rises above pre-industrial levels to well below 2 Celsius and to a safer 1.5 Celsius if at all possible. To do so, they agreed on the need to reduce emissions and work towards a low-carbon world within decades. Yet the UN found that even taking into account current Paris pledges, the world is on track for a 3.2 Celsius temperature rise, something scientists fear could tear at the fabric of society. Even if every country made good on its promises, Earth's carbon budget for a 1.5 Celsius rise, the amount we can emit to stay below a certain temperature threshold, would be exhausted within a decade. In its own words, the UN assessment is, quote, bleak. While it insisted the 1.5 Celsius goal is still attainable, it acknowledged that this would require an unprecedented, coordinated upheaval of a global economy that is still fueled overwhelmingly by oil and gas-fueled growth. Up next, Pompeo says Turkey test of Russian defense system is, quote, concerning. Airspace alert prompts capital evacuation in Washington. The Pentagon chief says ousted Navy secretary made a secret deal with President Donald Trump. Plus, Hawaii residents push back on government-approved improvement projects. Eagle News will return in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Eagle News coming to you from Virginia Beach. I am Sarah Nachman. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo voiced alarm over Turkey's testing of its Russian missile defense system, but says the NATO ally could still come back into U.S. good graces. During a press conference at the State Department in Washington, D.C., Pompeo also commented on elections, the impeachment investigation against U.S. President Donald Trump, as well as on the protest in Iran. Take a look.
Your first question about Turkey and the S-400, yeah, it's concerning. We are hopeful. We're still talking to the Turks. We're still trying to figure our way through this thing. I don't want to get out in front of what the president may or may not do, but we have made very clear to the Turkish government our desire to see them move away from the putting into full operationalization the S-400 weapon system.
The president tweeted just a short while ago that he'd encourage you essentially to testify in the impeachment investigation. Is that something you're considering?
When the time is right, all good things happen. We've received to date nearly 20,000 messages, videos, pictures, notes of the regime's abuses through Telegram messaging services. I hope they will continue to be sent to us. We will continue to sanction Iranian officials who are responsible for these human rights abuses. To the courageous people of Iran who refuse to stay silent about 40 years of abuse by the ruling regime, I say simply this: the United States hears you, we support you, and we will continue to stand with you in your struggle for a brighter future for your people and for your great nation. No stone unturned. So whatever nation it is, that we have information that so much as suggests that there might have been interference or an effort to interfere in our elections, we have an obligation to make sure that the American people get to go to the ballot box, cast their ballots in a way that is unimpacted by these malevolent actors trying to undermine our Western democratic values.
The U.S. Air Force scrambled jets Tuesday after reports of an unidentified aircraft in restricted airspace over Washington forced a brief lockdown of the White House and Capitol. The North American Aerospace Defense Command said in a statement that its jet fighters, quote, are on site and responding. They said the plane that allegedly violated the airspace of the U.S. capital city, quote, is not considered hostile at this time. The U.S. Secret Service said in a statement, quote, the White House was locked down this morning due to a potential violation of the restricted airspace in the national capital region. They said, quote, the lockdown has been lifted at this time. The alert lasted less than an hour. The Capitol Police said a report of a possible aircraft in restricted airspace came in at 8:27 a.m., and the situation was cleared at 9:12 a.m., quote, without incident. The alert evoked memories of the September 11, 2001 attacks when al-Qaeda jihadists piloted a passenger jet into the Pentagon and were believed to be targeting another at the White House or Congress before it crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. 2 other jets were flown by the attackers into the World Trade Center in New York. Washington airspace restrictions were severely tightened after those attacks, which left nearly 3,000 dead. And surface-to-air missile batteries have been installed around the city to target potentially attacking aircraft. In history, a number of Americans have flown aircraft into downtown Washington in protest. In 1974, Robert Preston, a despondent Army private who was 20 years old, landed a military helicopter on the White House lawn after police cars tracked him on the ground and the Secret Service agents fired at him with shotguns. In April 2015, Florida mailman Doug Hughes, angry about how big money was allegedly corrupting U.S. politics, flew undetected in a small gyrocopter into downtown Washington, landing it just outside the Capitol building. He landed without incident, was arrested, and a year later was sentenced to 120 days in jail for the felony crime of operating the aircraft without a pilot license. The U.S. Defense Secretary defended the decision to sack his Navy secretary, saying he went behind his back to make a deal with the White House over a convicted Navy SEAL's future. Mark Esper told reporters Richard Spencer, the Navy's top civilian, admitted he had gone around Esper and Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley. Esper and Milley were holding their own discussions with President Donald Trump last week about the SEALs case, which caused a rare public split between the Pentagon leadership and the U.S. Commander-in-Chief over military justice. Esper said of Spencer's secret talks, quote, we were completely caught off guard by this information and realized that it undermined everything we had been discussing with the president. He said, quote, we have a chain of command that should be followed, and that chain of command must be kept informed. Secretary Spencer broke these rules and thus lost my trust and confidence. Spencer was fired on Sunday amid a dispute over whether Edward Gallagher, a Navy SEAL accused of war crimes in a high-profile case but convicted of a lesser offense, should be demoted and expelled from the elite commando force. Gallagher, a SEAL sniper and medic, was originally accused of premeditated murder after allegedly stabbing to death a captured wounded Islamic State fighter in Iraq in May 2017. After Gallagher went on trial at the beginning of 2019, this case became a cause célèbre in conservative media, championed especially by Fox News, and Trump voiced support for him. In March, the president intervened to have him taken out of a Navy jail and placed in a Navy hospital. In Hawaii, several events, local residents and other critics have openly resisted against the construction or improvements of government-sponsored projects, which they still claim to lack transparency and input by the public, in addition to being very expensive. Eagle News correspondent Alfredo Cenas with a story.
I'd like to tell them that they really need to listen to the people, and we really want to get the people out there to vote, and so that's really the people's voices that they're representing. They are public servants. They get paid because we pay taxes, and they have an obligation to do what's good for the people, not what's good for their pockets or what's good for business.
Just like the rail, which was originally projected to be $2.8 billion. Right now we're looking at $9 billion or even higher. The the way the governor is putting it is the mayor's going to be, or the city will be responsible for any cost increase. So if there are big design changes or delays, okay, who's going to pay for that?
When our news team recorded those interviews earlier this summer, little did we realize that their remarks would actually paint a much bigger picture of an ongoing issue for the state of Hawaii, especially throughout this decade. That as local governments continue to improve facilities and infrastructure, however noble the efforts, residents and critics are also clamoring, enough. Other projects also encountering pushback include the renovation of the Alawai Canal, located north of Waikiki. Another is the construction of community facilities at a popular beach park located in Waimanalo on the other side of Honolulu, particularly at an area known as Sherwood Forest. Critics on these and similar projects have repeatedly complained a lack of transparency by the government at all levels.
We're against the use of detention basins. We think that the Army Corps, which built dams, on the mainland, they need it because their watersheds are thousands of miles long and there's nowhere for the water to go. Over here on Oahu, the Alawai Canal watershed is basically 7 miles long from ocean to the top of the valley, and we don't believe their studies are accurate. We think they're misleading. We think they massaged it just to get funding, federal funding. In 2015, the projected damage was in the neighborhood of $318 million, and behind closed doors without public oversight, it increased to $1.14 billion.
In all due respect, Mayor, I know a lot of people are here and they're very unhappy with the decisions that you have been making for Honolulu. For me, I come with no hate intended for you. What I am here to share, though, Mayor, is that I encourage you to hear the hearts and the voices of the people you represent here in Honolulu. As you can see, I am a Kanaka Maoli woman, and so not only is this a community issue, but it is also a Kanaka Maoli issue, being that we have kupuna iwi, which are ancestral bones that have been placed in that area.
Meanwhile, state and local officials like Heidi Tsuneyoshi have acknowledged the growing concerns of their constituents, while trying to balance the government's efforts for an improved quality of life throughout the islands.
Well, being a council member and being on committees where these important issues have come through, I feel that the resounding, connecting piece throughout all these issues, that the people really feel like their voices aren't being heard, that they're saying, please take care, please respect our land, please respect our people, and make sure that the health and safety of our current generations and future generation is taken into account. So with all of these different issues, I've been trying to do my best to support the people in that very message, is just to make sure that their messages are heard, that their concerns are heard, and that we address those in an adequate way. For instance, with the installation and the windmills going up in Kohuku, the issue there is that these are the largest wind turbines in our nation, sited right in back of a school, and we don't know the health and safety risks to the students there, which is a very real concern.
As for closing thoughts, here are some direct and personal messages from all those involved.
If we can try to change, if they can get involved in government, because I know for a lot of the young people, they feel like, what's the point? Why even get involved? Just leave, because it's not going to change. And they shouldn't feel that way. They should be able to live in Hawaii and enjoy it, and they should be able to get involved. I want them to run for office. I think we need more young people in office. I think we need more people who are more in touch to be in running, so that they will represent what the people want, not necessarily big business buying into our communities.
For me, Mayor, I come with no hate for you. I just come with encouragement to do what is right and to stand by the people that you are supposed to be representing.
So as we talk about aloha and we talk about our ohana, and as we talk about making sure we malama and take care of everybody, and that we all do our kuleana, our responsibility to do what we can do to make sure future generations are safe, I think all of these are just pointing to that the people are saying, please think a little more about the choices that we make. Let's make better choices to be sure that we're all safe and healthy.
As of this report, a state circuit court judge has ordered an injunction halting funds for the Alawai Canal project pending completion of environmental impact surveys. Honolulu Mayor Kirk Caldwell has decided that only Phase 1 of the improvements at Waimanalo Beach Park be completed while awaiting the results from the state and other experts as to the origin of an artifact discovered at the work site. And finally, the Honolulu city government has determined that it is unable to override a decision by the state in allowing construction of additional wind turbines at the northern Oahu town of Kahuku. Other projects also making headlines as we speak include the Honolulu Rail and the 30-meter telescope or TMT on the Big Island. Both are already experiencing huge delays, which can be translated into additional millions of taxpayer dollars, which the public will have to address sooner, if not later. Reporting from the North Shore of Oahu Island in Hawaii, I'm Alfred Acenas for Eagle News, 1 with 25.
Thanks, Alfred. That is today's Eagle News. Join us again tomorrow for stories that matter to you. Visit our websites at eaglenews.net and eaglenewslive.com. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/Eagle News and on Facebook at facebook.com/Eagle News. Thank you for watching. I am Sarah Nachman and I am 1 with 25.